is it the way in which we're raising our children where we think that each time that we're told something that's not being approved by a manager or like a authority figure, that we're feeling shameful or we're feeling bad? Or what is like the root of all of that, where we feel like we're bad people and if we do something bad at work?
Yeah, it could be that for so many of us, I don't know about the developmental side. I don't know
Yeah.
about the child, what messages we get as children. But I do think for a lot of us, our identity is wrapped up in our work.
Mm-hmm.
That when I do good work, that means I'm contributing. I'm worthwhile on the planet, which is unfortunate, right? We
Yes.
should think of ourselves as human beings, not human doings, as some people like to say. But for so many of us, particularly when we're isolated from our family and friends, I wouldn't be surprised if people have even more of their identity tied up in work right now because um, there's lots of great research showing that people are more resilient and bounce back from hardship when they have lots of roles in their social lives, when they're
Mm-hmm.
clearly a good sister and they're a really good neighbor and they play an important role at church. Well, so many of these roles have kind of been stripped away right now, right? I mean, you might be a good sister on the other side of the country texting your sister saying, "Hey, nice job. Hey, today's your big day." But you don't feel like you're the kind of sister that you normally are, where you get to see one another. You didn't get home for Christmas, right? Now there are all these ways in which you feel like some of your roles have been stripped away socially. So I think for more of us right now, our identities are tied up in our work.
Oh, wow. That's a
Um,
great point.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Work and then social media, like your social
Mm-hmm.
media
yep,
persona, like
yes,
yeah, that's so interesting. Wow.
yeah,
That's powerful.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
And I was on the other side of that, like why would someone dread giving feedback?
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm really glad you asked this question because so many of us dread it. There's one survey done by Zinger and Folkman that found that 44% of employees dread giving negative feedback to anyone at work. And you'd think that, okay, well, managers are going to be a lot better, right? Managers have to do this. Their numbers are going to be better. And data there shows that 1 in 5 managers, 21%, will just not have negative feedback conversations. They will just avoid it altogether. I was in this situation not too long ago. I had hired a designer to do some work for me, um, and her initial designs, I wasn't happy with them. And my first thought was like, "Oh, I hired the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
I better hire someone else." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Like, let's give her a chance. Let me give her some." Even I, who think a lot about feedback, was immediately like, "Oops, she can't do it. Pivot to someone else."
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do is we need to, instead of assuming that this is the best work they can do, to assume instead, okay, this is our starting point. Great. I need to give you some feedback so that it can get better. I think for a lot of us, are getting back to the issue of identity, our identities are wrapped up in being a nice person, a kind person. I think of myself, right, as a good guy, as someone who's really supportive of people. And if I say that bad thing, then I'm a bad guy, right? Or I'm going to feel like a bad guy. And so some of us don't do those things because we're thinking that we're too nice to say those
Mm-hmm.
things. But the way I try to think about it is, I'm being the good guy if I let people know, like, hey, here's what you can improve, right? Especially if you're in an organization where word's going to get around about someone being bad at something, you don't want that word to get around, right? And that can even be
Mm-hmm.
the way that you can frame it. You can say, hey, look, I want, when people talk about you, Lindsey, I want them to say she's one of the best podcast hosts I've ever seen. Um, uh, but right now I'm concerned that they're saying blank instead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be like, oh my gosh, wait,
This
they're
feels
saying that
too
about me?
true.
Yeah, this is real. This is very
Use
I
a
real.
know.
work example, please, okay?
Trigger trace.
Yeah,
Come on.
honestly. Turned into a real feedback session.
I know.
Where's
I
our
saw Lindsey's eyes.
sandwich?
I feel Lindsey's eyes geting bigger. She's just like, wait, what have you heard about me? What
Yeah,
is it?
honestly.
I don't think public podcast was on the list
Yeah, honestly.
of ways to get feedback.
You're like, can I be a data data analyst for this example.
Exactly, right. And so framing it that way, because people are always, concerned about how other people are seeing them. So to let them know, I'm concerned that people are going to have this perception of you. I want that perception to go away. I want to make sure that perception isn't even a possibility, right? That never crosses anyone's mind. And then people will feel that, getting back to your good intentions, that you're looking out for them, and people really appreciate that.
I love that. I wonder with so just as a first note, it's always really important for us because there's so many women of our community that are in corporate jobs that do work within the corporate space. And I've always been like a champion of people working in the corporate space because it's a really beautiful experience. But, for some of the people that maybe are small business owners, they started their own thing, they're working with contractors, or maybe they're working with people that are temp, like your person that's your designer that you just hired for this one project. Is the same sort of feedback appropriate, or like what do we do in those shorter term relationships? Like, should we be investing that much energy as with someone we're working with long term?
That's a great question, because so many of us are doing side hustles and doing gigs, and you're just hiring someone for a one-off, right? I would say do it even in those short-term relationships, because you're trying to build your feedback muscle, right? If you're one of the people, if you're one of those 20% especially that tends to avoid feedback conversations, there's some beauty in practicing giving feedback to people that you're just going to have a short-term relationship with, because now you're getting to practice. You're getting to find out, like, okay, I'm going to try this strategy. Therese suggested it. I'm going to try it and see what happens. Oh, it wasn't so bad, actually. So because we need feedback on our feedback, right? We need to see that we can do this. And if you're someone who tends to avoid these conversations, you don't realize that they don't tend to be the end of the world. But if you start practicing them, you'll see that. So I would advise it just in terms of, as a practice exercise. I was working with a CEO, and she was in her early 20s. She just started her company, and she wasn't very used to giving feedback. She only had 3 employees, small, and one of her key people was underperforming, and she needed to let him know this. And she went in, she like had a little script. She had rehearsed it the night before, and she'd rehearsed it in the shower that morning. And she was so certain this was going to go well. And she said her little script, and he got really upset. And she's like, but I said all the things. But this should have gone well. And we've been there where we practice the scripts, especially if you're a new manager. But I think what was hard for her is she hadn't had any practice giving critical feedback to anyone. The first time that she was doing it was in this relationship that really, really mattered. And so she was clinging to having the perfect script, and the perfect script failed her. But she couldn't even like pivot and try to listen to him, because she was so caught up in like, did I say all my key points, right? So it's one of the reasons that I think practicing feedback, I even practice with my husband, right? I'm like, hey, I'm going to try a new technique. And what do you think of this one, right? And then he'll be like, actually, that did make it easier. Or he'll be like, ouch, right? So practicing with people, that can be one way to view it.
Are there ways in which, whether you're in a corporate setting or more of like a startup entrepreneurial setting, where you can set up a precedent for feedback? And like, what would that look like, so that, the team and anyone coming onto the team who's new kind of knows the deal when it comes to how...
I'm trying to think of companies. There's like famous companies that really are like feedback focused companies. I'm trying to think of some examples, but continue.
Yeah, no, you're right. So Bridgewater, with the financial services investment company, is really known for this. Right. Yeah. Ray Dalio's company. They have they're to the point, I think there are 21 qualities, and you rate every other employee that you interact with on these 21 qualities, and your ratings are public. Like, I could go and see your ratings on how good are you at giving examples in meetings. Like, wow, like, I only got a 2 out of 5 on that, right? They're really transparent. He calls it radical transparency. That he's gone really far, and that's I'm not
like Black Mirror. You're like,
exactly, very Black Mirror. Right. I'm not suggesting this. First of all, it's an incredible amount of work, and also he has huge turnover. Bridgewater, they lose 30% of their employees in the first 18 months. So 1 out of 3 people are out of there. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting this is a model, but to your point, what would be simpler ways to create a feedback culture, right? Because I think that's what you're getting at. How do I create a culture of feedback? A good thing that you can do as a manager is to tell your team, like, I'm always on a quest for improvement, or whatever words feel yummy in your mouth. Like, I'm trying to be I'm trying to make this my best year as a manager. I'd love feedback on what I could do to improve. So making it clear that you're open to feedback, and that's huge because employees are often reluctant to give feedback up, right? So that's one way that you can create a really good culture of feedback, is to tell people you want to know how things are going, what you can do to improve. What's my main limiter right now? What do you see as my main limiter? And then the other way to create a really good feedback culture is when you're having conversations with your employees, ask them, how do you think that went, right? How do you think last week's show went? What were you happy with? What did you think was the best moment? What would you do differently if you could have the exact same guest on? What would you do differently? And so what's nice about that is you're letting the other person know this is a conversation. We're a team here. We're figuring this out together, right? It's not just me spouting pronouncements on your work. Instead, it's like, what did you like? What was your favorite part of that? What would you do? What would you do exactly the same way? What were you like, fist in the air? I did that, right? Because we want feedback to be a conversation. If it's one way, that person's going to tune you out or to get defensive. If it's a conversation, then we're both engaged.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Morning Microdose by Almost 30.
We hope you enjoyed waking up.
As always, we encourage you to take what resonates and leave the rest. If you enjoyed this trip, tune into the full episode on the Almost 30 podcast. All episode information can be found in the show notes.
Make sure to subscribe, and if this becomes a part of your morning routine, be sure to share it with a friend. We have new inspiring doses Monday through Friday. Follow us on Instagram at Morning Microdose, and follow Almost 30 at Almost 30 Podcast.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the vortex.